Okay, is the UK overcrowded? Is the UK overcrowded? That is $1 million question, or probably about 100 billion euro question, because nobody really knows. Not even the government, I think, knows what the true populace of the UK is. The figures that are released here aren't actual factual figures, they're an estimate. But it's not even straightforward like that. If you look into the figures and you try to see what the population of England is, or the UK is, in conjunction with migration, to see if there's been an increase in the populace, you can sometimes search for the figures of the whole of the UK and only be given figures for a select part of the UK as if it's factual, when it could only apply to the immigration to Wales, or the immigration to Scotland, or the immigration to England or Northern Ireland. It could be even split up into a North and South for England. So the figures that you could be receiving when you apply for them figures could be misleading to start with before you get into that. I'll go a step further. Things that are sometimes, depending which figures you receive, not included in them figures is people travelling free through Europe. So people that have come from the EU might not be in the figures, because the figures that you normally get is international migration, and international migration only applies to outside of the EU. So the figures that you might be getting don't even include European migration. It also may not cover people working on a student visa, which might be neglected from it. It could also not include people travelling for holidays as migration, even if they're staying for 3-4 months, might not be included. So the figures that you get are totally pointless. There is no way anybody could go through all that with all those little loopholes and get an understanding of what the true number of migration to the UK and the current population is. So the fact is, nobody, no matter what department of government, really knows what the population of the UK is. It's an estimate, and they've chosen to mitigate large sections of people that are living in the UK.
So what effects that having on services then in the UK, such as the NHS or housing?
Well, this has been a topic on radio, and it's been all over, and I think it's where Labour's going to run for the next election, which is farcical when you look at what they're using to gain votes. They're complaining that the NHS is now stretched to breaking point because of a spike. But they're not pointing out that the population of the UK has increased by about, going on what figures you read, between 12 and 20% within the last 15 to 20 years. It hasn't jumped up in that proportion due to birth rate. It's jumped up in that proportion due to mass migration to this country. What the Conservatives have done to adjust the figures and be seen to be doing something about the immigration issue is they've decided to tighten up immigration. Now, when they're talking about immigration, they're using the same trick that they do with the figures. The immigration that they're targeting is international immigration. This is why I've diversed into this. The NHS is at breaking point to a degree. It's overstretched and they're busier than normal, because the new residents of the UK that have come are not in proportion to the number of staff in the NHS. It's not gone hand in hand and grown in comparison. Now, when you listen to the Conservatives and Labour come on and speak about migration and about the populace, they're always quick to tell you that the people that come in from that emigrate into England pay more in tax than the mass of other people. What they're referring to then is they're now talking about the international immigration. If you look at most of the workers that work in the NHS, the majority of people that work that are not indigenous to this nation come from the Philippines, which is most nursing staff are imported from, Africa as a continent, I know it's a group of countries, and India and Pakistan. This is where most of the health workers come from. So they use them figures because obviously they pay a lot of tax because they're skilled people that come. So when they say that the immigrants to England pay most tax, it's true. But they're not the same immigrants that you think they're referring to. What they're doing is they're fudging it. What they don't include is the fact that European travel to England isn't included in international migration. And what the Conservatives did is decide to tighten up on immigration, but they can't do nothing about free travel in Europe, so they had no hand in that. So the people that they've targeted to stop the immigration figures and cut them down are the countries where the staff come from that support the NHS.
So what effect does that on the housing?
Well, this is the same thing again. The population hasn't had a sudden boom that we can deal with. If a birth rate comes, it takes 18 years for them children to need housing, if they're left home at 18. What's made it now difficult is because you've got a large volume of adults and ready-made families now needing housing. That's why the supply doesn't meet the demand. The problem with housing and the NHS is the numbers that have swelled the economy. And if the figures were really true and the mass number of all these immigrants, including the European immigrants, were all paying in this massive tax, then where would the problem be? Because surely the funding would already be in place to support the NHS and grow in scale and the housing. So if they're really paying in, where's the problem? And the government's not dealing with it because they're not admitting that that's a problem. And the Labour government's pointing it out that it is a problem, but not admitting that it's their fault that that's the problem. So they're both, Labour and Conservative, as bad as each other because none of them are addressing the fact that the populace has gone up so fast that we're not ready to deal with an infrastructure. I haven't got the answers, but I know the problem. Surely they can see it.
I think they probably are aware of the problem. They're all aware of the problem, but they don't know what the answers are, just like us.
I think the problem with Europe, the European Union, is a lot of we're paying vast amounts of money, millions and millions a week goes into that. And then on the other hand, we have a large influx of populace which need to be cared for, so that's extra costs on the NHS, extra costs on housing, and also social security benefits. So we don't just pay into Europe to be a member of Europe, we also support everybody that comes from Europe. So we take them in and then we charge for the benefit of taking them in. This is why it's gone a bit skew-if. And people are quick to jump on and say anybody that's anti-immigration, anti-Europe's racist. It's not true. The people that I really feel sorry for is the international community that can no longer come because they're being victimised for the immigration problem when they're the ones that contribute most to our country. I mean, if you look at Pakistan and India and places like Canada, and they're all former members or current members of the Commonwealth, which we have a common ancestry with. Yet they're being penalised to support a European movement which most people haven't got a shared history with, and we don't have a shared culture, and a lot of them don't have a skilled profession. And then they're quick to point out saying that people that leave the country balances the people that come in, but there's been a population increase even when they've skewed figures. So it's clearly a political lie, that. There's no way that can be true. And then they say it doesn't affect anybody's jobs. This is Labour. This is good. I'm going to explain this one to you. Because the reason that people are losing their jobs is because it's the temporary contracts, the agency workers that are taking the jobs from the paid workers. Ed Miliband spoke to me personally in Mexborough which is in Doncaster, about 4 or 5 years ago. I spoke to him about my wife that had lost her job because she'd been replaced by some Polish workers. he was quick to jump on, and my wife is also an immigrant to this country, an international immigrant. He were a bit confused because what he wanted to do was tar that question as a racist question or a bigoted question. That's the view I thought he was going to take. It was not long after Gordon Brown were caught saying that woman were a bigot because she questioned no immigration. So I think he were a bit caught off guard. So he decided to jump in with this policy that the reason that people are losing their jobs is because these temporary contracts and agencies are the reason that people lose a full-time job. At that time I was working for Rotherham Council on a temporary contract because they wouldn't offer me a full-time job because they didn't want the responsibility of paying me a pension or giving me the benefits of a full-time work. So I said, how can you blame that in one hand and exploit it in the other? Because your council is a Labour council that's using that loophole that you're blaming the companies for using, when you're exploiting it yourself. This is a man that's running for election to run this country, and he had to be saved by his spin doctor who decided to point out, oh well, we're all immigrants here because my granddad came from Ireland. That's not addressing the issue. That's brushing it under the carpet because you haven't got an answer, because you're not intelligent enough to work out what I'm saying without admitting that you made mistakes.
Thank you. I'm sure this can go on for a long time.